Hey everybody, it's Ron, and I want to tell you a story about business and how that story changed everything. At its core, a nuclear power plant really isn't mysterious. It's just a heat source designed to make steam. Inside that funnel-shaped reactor building, uranium fuel rods sit inside water. When atoms split because of that, they release heat. That heat boils water. The steam spins a turbine. The turbine turns a generator, and electricity flows out to millions of homes and businesses. It's a sophisticated way to do something power plants have done for more than a century. Make steam, spin metal, sell power. On the afternoon of March 11, 2011, engineers at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant are managing that same controlled heat when the ground began to move. A magnitude 9.0 earthquake struck off the northeast coast of Japan. Deep beneath the ocean floor, a massive section of seabed shifted upwards. When the seafloor shifts like that, it displaces an enormous volume of water. That water doesn't disappear, it has to go somewhere. It moves. The movement becomes a tsunami racing towards the coast. Inside the Fukushima plant, the reactors responded exactly as they were designed to do. Control rods dropped into place and the chain reaction stopped. But stopping the reaction doesn't stop the heat. The fuel remains dangerously hot and must be cooled continuously. Cooling pumps rely on electricity, and when the tsunami floods the backup generators, those pumps lost power. Now, the plant is no longer producing electricity, but it's still producing heat. And without cooling, heat becomes pressure. And pressure, that becomes risk. Inside the control room, the operators realize something before the rest of the world does. This is not only a natural disaster, it's the moment a global energy business model built on calculated risk began to unravel. And that was on March 11th, 2011. From Business Basics, I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the daily podcast where we explain the stories that changed business forever. Every date on the calendar has a story where business reshaped the world. Today, March 11th, that story takes us to 2011, when nuclear power plant risk actually did become real. Before the earthquake, nuclear power had a very specific reputation. It was expensive to build, and it was slow to get permits for, and it was politically debated. But once operational, it was steady. Reliable baseload electricity, no carbon emissions during operation. It had long lifespans with predictable output. For utilities and governments, that predictability was the selling point. A nuclear plant is essentially a steam factory that requires a lot of capital. Billions of dollars up front, decades of operation. The math only works if catastrophic failure is considered extremely rare. That assumption was reinforced by regulation and insurance structure. In the United States, the Price-Anderson Act capped that liability. In Japan, the government framework limited exposure for utilities like Tokyo Electric Power Company. Private insurers would never fully underwrite a worst-case nuclear event. The state stood behind it the rest of the way. And that structure did two things. It allowed nuclear expansion, and it quietly priced catastrophic risk below its theoretical maximum. By 2011, Japan generated roughly 30% of its electric from nuclear power. Germany also relied heavily on it, and France even more so. Markets weren't blind to the risk, they just believed it was bounded. Fukushima would test that belief. As cooling systems failed at Fukushima, the crisis inside the plant became a crisis of confidence outside of it. engineers made the call to inject seawater into the reactors. And that was a move that would permanently damage them, but would also buy some time. The technical goal was containment. The financial consequences were secondary in that moment, but they were unavoidable. Within hours, investors understood that something had broken beyond a single facility. Shares of the Tokyo Electric Power Company began to fall sharply, and over the following months, the stock would lose more than 80% of its value. The company would eventually require a government-backed rescue. And the thing is, the problem wasn't just the physical damage, it was what we call exposure. Nuclear power depends on the belief that catastrophic failure is extraordinarily rare and financially contained. Fukushima proved that while the probability may be low, the cost is enormous when it happens. Governments responded quickly. Germany moved to shut down older reactors and accelerated its nuclear phase-out. Japan ordered nationwide safety reviews that led to the temporary closure of all reactors. Insurance markets, you can guess, they tightened up pretty quickly. Regulators imposed new, what we call stress testing standards, and financing for new plants became a lot more expensive. The models hadn't predicted this exact sequence, but markets adjust when precedent replaces theory. In the weeks after Fukushima, the headlines were about explosions and evacuations. In the years after, the story was about money. Before this moment, nuclear power was treated like long-term infrastructure. You borrowed big, you built once, you ran for decades. The risk was assumed to be very remote. After Fukushima, that assumption changed. Not because reactors stopped producing electricity, many of them still did, but because investors had now seen what a worst-case scenario looked like. When lenders get nervous, they don't argue philosophy, they change terms. Projects take longer to approve, financing costs climb, insurance expectations tighten. That alone is enough to slow an industry built on massive upfront capital. At the same time, other options started looking different. Wind and solar were smaller bets. Modular, spread out. If one turbine fails, it doesn't become a national crisis. That matters when you're allocating billions. Nuclear power didn't vanish after March 11th, but it became harder to expand. The earthquake moved the ocean, the market moved the math, and that shift began on March 11th, 2011. I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the podcast that finds the turning points behind the headlines. To hear more stories like this, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And if you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps more people find the story behind the business. And if you want to actually understand business without the fluff or the buzzwords or the MBA language, start by visiting businessdailypodcasts.com.